In this gripping video, we'll take you deep into the terrifying reality faced by a 65-year-old sailor who lost his rudder in the middle of a raging storm on the Indian Ocean. What followed wasn't just a mechanical failure. It was a life-or-death battle against the sea, isolation, and the clock. This isn't just a story. It's a powerful lesson for every sailor out there, whether you're planning a coastal hop or a circumnavigation. We'll break down the critical decisions he made, the key mistakes that nearly cost him everything, and the survival tactics that ultimately made the difference. From understanding the limits of your gear to adapting under pressure when everything goes wrong, this video reveals the hard truths of ocean sailing that textbooks don't teach. What would you do if you suddenly couldn't steer your boat in 8-meter swells? Stay with us as we analyze this dramatic event, extract real-life lessons, and deliver safety insights that could one day save your life. Like, subscribe, and don't miss what happened next, because this is a story every sailor needs to hear. The sky was cloaked in an oppressive gray, with clouds that seemed carved from lead as the Indian Ocean roared below. João, a 65-year-old sailor with wrinkles that told tales of decades at sea, gripped the helm of his 45-foot monohull, the Blue Horizon, with steady hands. It was February 15th, 2023, and he was sailing solo 700 nautical miles southwest of the Cocos Islands, bound for Port Louis, Mauritius. A 2,200-mile passage that tested even the most seasoned mariners. The wind howled at 25 knots, but João sensed something worse was coming. The barometer was dropping fast, and the VHF radio crackled with warnings of a tropical storm forming to the east. João was a man of medium build, with thinning gray hair and eyes that gleamed with the determination of someone who had faced the sea for 40 years. He was no longer young, but his passion for sailing remained unshaken. The Blue Horizon, a Beneteau Oceanus 45, was his trusted companion, outfitted for ocean passages with a 54-horsepower Yanmar engine, 570-liter water tanks, and a complete Raymarine navigation system, including GPS, chart plotter, and radar. On deck, Harken winches secured the lines controlling the Genoa and mainsail, both partially reefed to meet the rising wind. The passage had begun 10 days earlier, on February 5th, under clear skies and steady 15-knot southeast winds. João maintained an average speed of 6 knots, trimming the sails to catch the optimal wind angle. His routine was methodical. He checked the GPS hourly, logged his position in the logbook, and inspected the lines and hull. He knew the Indian Ocean, especially during cyclone season, was unforgiving. From November to April, tropical storms could erupt with winds exceeding 120 kilometers per hour and waves reaching 10 meters. Yet he trusted his experience and the Blue Horizon. That afternoon, the wind climbed to 35 knots, and the sea began forming white crests that crashed against the hull. João reefed the mainsail to the second point and swapped the Genoa for a storm jib, a smaller reinforced sail designed for extreme conditions. He donned his Mustang life jacket, clipped himself to the safety line, and checked the EPIRB, the emergency transmitter that could alert rescue teams if the worst came to pass. The horizon darkened, and the sea seemed to swallow the daylight. By 6 p.m., the storm hit with full force. The anemometer recorded gusts of 50 knots, and 8-meter waves lifted the Blue Horizon like a toy before plunging it into frothy troughs. João gripped the helm with both hands, muscles taut, striving to keep the boat at a 45-degree angle to the waves, a technique that minimized the risk of capsizing. The noise was deafening. The wind screamed through the rigging, and waves exploded against the deck, sending jets of salt water cascading into the cockpit. Suddenly, a violent jolt shook the boat. João felt the helm seize, as if the rudder had snagged something solid. He tried to turn it, but there was no response. The Blue Horizon began to slew sideways, vulnerable to the waves now slamming directly into the hull. Heart pounding, João rushed to the stern, clutching the handrails as rain lashed his face. He peered over the edge and saw the worst. The rudder was broken, its main blade torn off, likely from a collision with floating debris, a common hazard in rough seas. Without a rudder, the boat was nearly unsteerable. João knew that in such conditions, he risked being thrown against the waves or even capsizing. He returned to the cockpit, his mind racing. Years of experience had taught him to stay calm in emergencies, but the weight of the situation was crushing. He was 65, alone in the middle of the Indian Ocean, hundreds of miles from the nearest port, and his boat was crippled. For a moment, he considered activating the EPIRB and calling for rescue, but something within him resisted. He wasn't one to give up. Joan decided to try controlling the boat by adjusting the sails. He hoisted a try-sail, a triangular storm sail, on the mainmast and tweaked the jib to balance the boat. With the sails set, he managed to hold the blue horizon on a rough course, but the control was imprecise and the boat still yawed dangerously. The waves continued to batter the hull, and the wind, now gusting to 55 knots, threatened to tear the sails. He needed a more robust solution. Then Joan recalled a technique he'd learned in a nautical safety course years earlier, using a drogue or sea anchor to steer a boat without a rudder. He hurried to the forward locker where he kept a 30-inch gallereator drogue, designed to create drag in the water and stabilize the vessel. The device was a conical nylon net, connected to two bridle lines that would be secured to the boat. The concept was simple, but executing it in a storm was another matter. With the boat pitching violently, Joan dragged the drogue to the cockpit, clipping himself to the safety line to avoid being swept overboard. He attached the 50-meter bridle lines to two Harken blocks mounted amidships, one on each side. The lines ran through the blocks to the cockpit winches, allowing him to adjust the drogue's tension and angle. He tied a 5-meter chain to the drogue's end, adding weight to keep it submerged, and tossed the assembly over the stern, letting the lines pay out slowly as the drogue opened in the water. The effect was immediate. The blue horizon slowed, and the stern aligned with the waves, reducing the side-to-side roll. Joan adjusted the bridle lines on the winches, pulling more to port to correct the course toward Mauritius. The drogue acted as an improvised rudder, allowing him to hold the boat on an approximate heading of 270 degrees, though at a reduced speed of 3 knots. He checked the GPS. 1,500 nautical miles remained to Port Louis. It would be a long, grueling journey, but he was determined. The next 48 hours were a test of endurance. The storm showed no mercy, and Joan worked relentlessly, tweaking the bridle lines hourly to compensate for shifts in wind and currents. He inspected the lines regularly, fearing that friction on the blocks might wear them through. To reduce the risk, he fitted protective hoses over the high-friction areas, a trick he'd learned on previous passages. Fatigue was taking its toll, and his arms ached from cranking the winches. He forced himself to rest in 20-minute intervals, lying on the cockpit floor with his life jacket still clipped to the safety line. At night, the sky cleared briefly, revealing stars that seemed to mock him with their distant calm. Joan thought of his life, of the passages he'd made in the Caribbean, the Atlantic, the Pacific. He recalled a storm off Cape Horn 20 years earlier, when he nearly lost the mast on a smaller boat. Back then, he was younger, stronger, but now he felt his experience outweighed muscle. He knew how to read the sea, anticipate the waves, and keep his mind sharp even when his body begged to quit. On the third day, the storm began to weaken. The wind dropped to 30 knots, and the waves, though still high, no longer broke with such ferocity. Joan seized the chance to make repairs. He checked the hull, fearing damage from the collision that destroyed the rudder, but found only scratches in the fiberglass. The Yanmar engine, which he'd avoided using to conserve fuel, was tested and ran perfectly, a relief in case he needed to maneuver in Port Louis. He also checked the satellite phone, sending a message to his family to say he was fine, omitting the rudder loss to spare them worry. With the drogue still in use, Joan refined his technique. He found that by precisely adjusting the bridle line's tension, he could alter the course by up to 30 degrees, enough to keep the blue horizon on track. He used the GPS to monitor progress, logging each hard-won mile in the logbook. The average speed was 3.5 knots, and he calculated it would take about 15 days to reach Mauritius, barring another storm. He rationed food and water, eating energy bars and freeze-dried meals, mindful of the 570-liter tank's consumption. The following days were a blend of monotony and tension. The Indian Ocean, even outside the storm, was unpredictable. Ocean currents like the South Indian Current pushed the boat off course, demanding constant bridle adjustments. Joan faced moments of doubt, especially at night, when the sea's silence amplified his thoughts. What if the line snapped? What if another storm hit? He banished these fears by recalling his vow never to abandon the sea, a passion that had sustained him since his 20s. On the 10th day after losing the rudder, the sky was clear, and the wind blew a steady 15 knots. João partially hoisted the Genoa, using it alongside the drogue to gain speed. He reached 4.5 knots, an encouraging advance. The GPS showed he was 400 miles from Port Louis, and he began planning his arrival. Without a rudder, docking would be tricky, but he trusted the engine and the option to request port assistance via VHF. On the morning of the 15th day, March 2nd, 2023, João sighted the silhouette of Mauritius on the horizon. His heart raced. He adjusted the bridle lines one last time, aligning the blue horizon with the port's entrance. Over the VHF, he contacted the harbor master, explaining his situation. "This is Blue Horizon, 45-foot monohull solo sailor. Lost my rudder 1,500 miles back, requesting docking assistance." The voice on the other end sounded stunned, but promised immediate help. A pilot boat met the Blue Horizon 2 miles from the port. João carefully retrieved the drogue, coiling the lines to avoid tangles, and started the Yanmar engine, using the propeller to follow the pilot. At the harbor, a small crowd of sailors and staff had gathered, drawn by the story of a 65-year-old who sailed 1,500 miles without a rudder. When the Blue Horizon docked, with ropes tossed by assistants, applause erupted. João stepped off the boat, his legs shaky after weeks at sea. He looked at the Blue Horizon, its hull scarred by the storm but still proud. A local sailor, a 40-year-old with a full beard, shook his hand and said, "You're a legend, mate. Sailing 1,500 miles without a rudder? That's master-level stuff." João smiled, exhausted but proud. He knew he wasn't a legend, just a man who loved the sea and refused to let age define his limits. That evening, seated at a waterfront bar in Port Louis, João sipped a cold beer and gazed at the horizon, where the sun set in the shades of orange. He thought of the waves, the wind, the ocean's solitude. He thought of how, at 65, he still felt the same thrill as his first passage at 25. The sea didn't care about age, only skill and courage, and João knew that as long as his heart beat, he would keep sailing.